Now move on to item number 4, consent calendar, and I believe there's a clarification with regard to item number 1 by the clerk.
Yes, this item was continued from the October meeting. Mr. Chamberlain had asked for clarification on the minutes during Mr. Venero's presentation, and I did have the opportunity to go back and listen to the minutes, and the word HOV was actually used instead of HOT. So I just wanted to report that out. The minutes were reflected correctly.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, Director Bates?
I just note on item number 3, report number 3, I will abstain in the abundance of caution. I didn't feel conflicts completely on those particular brokers. Okay, so I'm going to stay off that one. Thank you.
Thank you. It's certainly noted. We now move on to item number 5, board business. We have 2 items. The first is the 241 fence improvement project construction / consulting services. We'll have a report by Valerie McFall.
Good morning, board members. Valerie McFall, Director of Environmental Services for the agency. The item before you today is to construct a wildlife fencing along the SR 241, the portion known as the Eastern Transportation Corridor. When the project was constructed, the agency received a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a biological opinion, which required the agency to construct 4 wildlife crossings along the 241. The Hall Road, Oak Canyon, the Assini crossing, as well as Windy Ridge. Within that biological opinion, it also required the agency to conduct a 5-year study documenting usage of the undercrossings by wildlife. This is an example of a typical undercrossing that exists on the State Route 241. So in 2004, we completed one of the requirements of the biological opinion, which was completing the wildlife studies. The study that was conducted by our consultants used cameras as well as surveys for looking at footprints and so forth to see what kind of animals were using the wildlife crossings. We completed the study in 2004, after which we contacted U.S. Fish and Wildlife and requested concurrence from them that we met our requirement for the project. In 2009, we received a response from Fish and Wildlife stating that they had concerns with the use of the undercrossings and the at-grade crossings that were occurring on the 241 toll road. Subsequent to that,
Chairwoman Bartlett, could I just ask a clarification?
Director Reardon?
Are you saying, Valerie, that 5 years passed before we got feedback from Fish and Wildlife?
yes, there were several discussions between 2004 and 2009 to resolve the issue, but they were waiting for a study to be completed by another entity. And so they were waiting for that results to get published before they were going to make a decision on our request. But yes, it took 5 years to get an answer.
I know that government moves slowly, but this just seems a little bit excessive.
Yes.
Isn't it, Madam Chair? Isn't
Yes.
that data? But this isn't like, this is data about animal mobility, right? And trends. This is about animals that have been killed, either animal on animal or animal with the fence issue with respect to cars. So when I got my briefing on it with our veterinarian, this is a lot of data that had to be compiled because you're talking about trends and movement of animals, especially animals that are, some are predatory in nature, and so you know there's a lot of tracking that goes on, and it has to be scientific. So I completely agree with you, Director Rudin, but I just think the fact that you have to get this data, right? They're going to hold you accountable, but they want to make sure the science is right, and we need to know the science is right. I mean, I guess in this field, that probably is about average when you're dealing about this animal tracking, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So the study that TCA commissioned, the 5-year study, was focused on our undercrossings. The 2009 study that U.S. Fish and Wildlife was waiting for was a larger study looking at all of the North Irvine Ranch area. So it included Santiago Canyon Road, all the toll roads. So it was basically that whole area, not just focused on the undercrossing. So there were 2 separate studies. As Director Spitzer was stating that the other study was much more broad and had a lot more scientific information that the service was referring to. So So getting the feedback from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, TCA developed a four-step plan to address the concerns that U.S. Fish and Wildlife had raised. In 2010, late 2010, we received authorization from the board to enter into a contract with UC Davis to implement this plan. The plan was to contract with UC Davis Wildlife Health Center and included them reviewing the existing conditions out on the toll road, looking at fence lines, wildlife movements, also reaching out to stakeholders to get agreement on what TCA was going to do to resolve the concerns raised by the service. This outreach included meeting with the resource agencies, Cal Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks, as well as the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. So it was a broad outreach. At the end of that process, UC Davis made the recommendations to TCA on how to make the improvements. So those steps have been completed, and today we're at step number 2, which is to implement those improvements. The future steps will include UC Davis preparing a report that documents that the improvements have been made and that the wildlife crossings are functioning as they're designed to, and reducing the incidence of wildlife access onto the roadway. The plan also includes ongoing funding for UC Davis to continue to monitor the wildlife through GPS collaring and camera usage to track the movement of the wildlife throughout the open space areas. So this here is a sample of the monitoring that UC Davis collected through the use of cameras. The red rows are the undercrossings that were required of TCA to construct with the 241. So we tracked the use of the mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, and deer, and this represents the total number of crossings that were captured by camera since 2011. So with that, we also have a brief video to show some of the video that was captured through this effort. So this is at one of our undercrossings. This is a mama mountain lion and her 3 cubs. This was captured in fall this year. And so this is a family that we continue to monitor. A few months later, in late November, we actually were able to capture the mother, and you can see her GPS collar on there, but we're able to recapture her. And what we do with UC Davis, they capture the mountain lions and they take blood samples for them to monitor their health, and they report that information back to the resource agency. So that's what our request today is, to continue providing this type of activity to track how far they're moving out and the overall health of those species. So with UC Davis, not only are they monitoring the mountain lion and other wildlife, they did conduct their field review. And in the field review, they identified issues with our fencing, such as some of the fencing crossed over V ditches, such as in this photo here. And you can see the animals can easily get under the fence and out onto the roadway. This is another example of some of the fencing concerns that they had was you can see the fence has been pushed down, and that's actually deer and other animals that can get through. They actually push down the fence to get through the area. Other examples are that some of the fencing is actually missing in these areas. So once UC Davis completed their assessment of the current fencing along the 241, they came with recommendations on how to resolve the concerns. And these recommendations included installing a fence that was appropriate for the wildlife that's out on the toll road and adjacent open space areas. Not only accounting for deer and mountain lion, but also bobcats and smaller mammals. The fencing also needs to be designed so it funnels the animals to the existing undercrossings. And then also, if the animals get onto the roadway, that they have a way to escape it safely. One of the also important features that they've identified is that we need to move the fence closer to the edge of roadway. As you know, a lot of the roadway slopes have native habitat, and that's an attraction for wildlife to go into there and use that area. So we want to minimize that and bring the fence closer to the roadway. And also, as the picture showed, we want to avoid crossing any drainages with the fencing so they can't climb under those fencing areas as well. So after UC Davis went through the recommendations and also the field assessments, they then went to the next step of prioritizing the areas that needed improvement. And so the areas that were identified as the highest priority within that section of the 241, and again, look in the map, State Route 91 is at the very top of the slide, and State Route interchange 261 is at the bottom of the slide. So within that section, UC Davis prioritized through color coding, and the areas highlighted in red, circled in red, is what we are proposing today to implement for the first phase of this project, again based on priority. So the fence that we're proposing to implement as part of this is 10 to 12 feet in height, and will include an 18-inch outrigger at the top of the fence that will be angled toward the open space. And this is important because mountain lions and others tend to try to climb over the fence, and so this will deter them from being able to do that. Another important design feature is actually burying the fence 24 inches. Coyotes and other smaller animals actually dig under the fence to gain access, and so by burying the fence, this will prevent them from doing that as well. So it's a very robust design to reduce wildlife access. To address one of the recommendations to prevent or allow animals to exit the roadway, we're also going to construct wildlife escape ramps. And this is an example on another facility, and this is a recommended design through Federal Highway Administration. And you can see what they can do is, if an animal gains access to the roadway, they can easily walk up the slope and jump out into the open space area. But if they're in the open space area, they don't have any greater ability to jump onto the roadway. So this will be a new feature of our roadway as well. So going over the history of the contract process, TCA issued an invitation for bid in September, and we advertised the invitation for bid through the agency's website, the Blue Book, McGraw-Hill, and other source documents or source sites. When the invitation for bid was released, we received 14 responses from firms that expressed interest in bidding on the project. With that, we had a mandatory job walk to show the contractors the job site and what was required of the project, the conditions and so forth. So of the 14 that expressed interest, 7 showed up for the job walk. On November 13th, we opened the bids. That's when they were due to the agency. We had one bid that was received from Crown Fence, and that bid was within $5,000 of the engineer's estimate. It was $5,000 more than what we had received from our engineer. And this item, in listening to the last board meeting, this item was presented to the Environmental Ad Hoc Committee in November, as well as the Technical Advisory Committee in December. So it was vetted through both those committees. But at this time, to move forward with the project, staff is recommending the award of the contract to Crown Fence for $2,908,968, as well as an amendment to RBF contract for design services. And this will allow the agency to respond to requests for Caltrans as they go through their review of the project designs, as well as authorizing a amendment to the existing UC Davis contract to conduct post-construction monitoring and also assist during construction with the project for $399,324, as well as authorizing construction or contract with Ghirardelli Associates to provide construction engineering management service that will oversee the contractor's work in the field, and then authorizing the CO to make amendments as needed within 5% of the total contract price. Staff will continue to provide updates to the board through our annual mitigation status update on the status of the project. And we will continue to keep you apprised of the project's design and any issues or other items as they come up. But at this time, this concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Directors, any questions or comments? Director Reardon.
Yes. Hi, Valerie.
Hello, how are you? Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, I do have some questions.
Sure.
All right. First of all, could you go back to that slide that shows the length? Is that the length of the fence?
Yes. Okay.
Shows the length, and then the red spots are the ones that we're
Yes,
looking at,
the
correct?
segments, yes.
Of the segments.
Mhm.
So, because what I really want to know is how many feet of fencing total at the end of all of this are we going to be talking about? And then what's the linear feet of the cost of this that's going to be taken care of with this project?
Okay, so the total project linear feet is, with this project,
What?
I just wanted to get a better price on these, so I didn't know what.
And you can install it over the holidays.
Yeah. That'll be your Christmas project.
the total project is about 52,000 linear feet. And
I'm sorry,
the total project's at 52,000 linear feet, and this project proposes to install 25,000 linear feet of it. So right now with this project, we're going to complete approximately half of the total project.
Okay. So, and I just did rough estimates on the numbers that you presented with all of the items. So it's about 3.8 million
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that's going to cost us to do this project.
The contract before you today is for $3.5 million. And for the activities that are going to occur during the current fiscal year, they are within the approved budget. And then future work in next fiscal years, we will have to get authorization from the board to do
The rest.
that work.
Are we doing all of this, not just the red areas, but we're doing the blue and the yellow and the red areas? We're doing the whole project at some point?
Yes.
Okay. So this is kind of expensive. Does anybody think it's expensive? Okay, just checking. Okay, so our technical advisory, Rich Schlesinger, our city engineer, asked some questions, and hopefully you have been made aware of what they are, because we did talk to Mike and Paul about that. Did we go back and talk to those six that walked through in addition to Crown, and ask them why they decided not to bid? Because we're ending up with one bid.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
And actually, Eileen here getting the contracts and.
Okay, Eileen.
Thank you.
We got responses out of 4 of the 6. 2 of them came back and indicated that their bonding capacity would not be sufficient to bid the project. 1 of them came back and indicated that they were not willing to take on the risk that was included in the contract and bid it the way that we had it. And 1 of them came back and felt that it would not be profitable to them.
Okay. And Eileen, I don't know, is it your responsibility or is it somebody else's responsibility that when this kind of thing happens, where we have 14 that are interested, 7 that walk through, and then we get 1 bid in response, is it a normal part of the process to go and ask those that were interested, that actually went through the walkthrough, to find out why they didn't?
We try to do that.
Okay, good. That's the right answer. Thank you. Okay, and let's see. The other question I had and the concern I had is, and I think it's on Ghirardelli,
Yes.
and not so much RBF, but Ghirardelli is the sole sourcing of a contract. So could you please give more of an explanation? And that's the kind of stuff that I would like to see in the agenda report,
Okay.
to explain that kind of stuff, because we have to, this is my concern, colleagues, is that 241 is getting scrutinized left and right, in and out, upside and down. And we just need to be really careful about what we spend money on, and we at least have to know that we've asked the right questions. So I'm just taking that very seriously, so that's why I'm doing this. Go ahead, darling.
We considered this very carefully, and because of AET currently occurring on the 241 and the other toll roads, and Ghirardelli is the CEM on that project, we thought it was really important that the CEM coordinate both projects so there wasn't any issues, timing, as far as ultimate design of the AET and so forth. And Ghirardelli is already in-house, and we didn't want differing opinions or different contractors out there without that coordination occurring, because there is a tremendous amount of activity going on with the AET project. And so we thought it was in the best interest of the agency to have a one person, one point of contact overseeing both projects so they didn't interfere with each other.
And their bid on this part of the project, is it consistent with what they're doing for us with the AET?
Yes.
All right, I'm finished for now. Thank you, Lisa.
And actually, Valerie, by using the same firm, even though it's sole source, I assume there's some cost savings then. So if we had actually selected another company, it might have been more expensive over the $200,000 mark, I would assume.
Yes, exactly. We went back to them and had them readjust their initial proposal to point out that they're already out there on the road, and they were able to reduce costs because of that. So, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Madam Chair, could I just ask a couple
Yes,
questions?
Director Spencer's
course,
next, and then
Director Shea.
Thanks, Christine. I'll just be brief. This corridor obviously runs through the 3rd Supervisorial District. It's kind of my backyard. I just live off San Diego Canyon. I was on the board when the road opened, and we had, deers were being slaughtered. And so when I was on the board, we put up an original. We did make, and rightfully so, a huge investment for a whole variety of reasons. And the fact of the matter is, the wildlife was there first, and then we put a road through their home. And so we have an absolute right, to make improvements in terms of increasing mobility, but when you do that, we all know we have to be good stewards. And it was just tragic then when you ride on the corridor, and we were literally putting deer into pickup trucks. So we fixed that, and you could see through the pictures, there's still some, cavities and areas where either animals have manipulated their way through the fence line, or it's still accessible. But there's two major issues here, in my opinion. First of all, we're regulated by Fish and Wildlife, and they get to tell us, right, pursuant to the permit. So we have a compliance and a regulatory issue. But our constituents are the motorists, obviously the toll road payers who use the road. But I don't know if you know anybody in your family or know anybody who's ever had a contact with a large animal against their car. It kills people. Kills the animal, kills people. So I think it's our duty, and probably moral duty in my opinion, to the animals. But it really is our public safety responsibility to the drivers. And I think I can say this, although this has been a long time, but I do believe that I have been in closed session more than a decade ago in a lawsuit as against this agency by a motorist who had a contact with a deer. So we have liability because we're representing that this is a safe place for people to drive. And given the fact we know that animals go and try to go into this free space or this open space, we really do have a responsibility in that end too. So I know there's still some discussion. I, at least for purpose of discussion, like to move the recommended actions. I think this is very, very important for all the reasons that have been stated, and we really do have a duty to do this.
I'll second that, and then I just want to ask a question.
Okay, yes, comments, Director Shea?
I appreciate what Todd has said, because when it did open, we were very concerned about the animals and what we were seeing. Which brings me to the point, why is it that we don't address this as a full package and just start doing the entire project?
We have developed plans to do the entire toll road system, the 241. We are working with other entities to obtain funding to do that, but we're bringing this to the board right now because this is a requirement of the agency per biological opinion. So that's why we're bringing this portion forward. We're still working to find other funding sources, but as we move forward in future budget processes with the agency, we will continue to work with the board to identify funding to implement other portions of the toll road as well.
Well, what is the total cost? I mean, why can't we take it out of our present budget, and then if we get grant money, can we do it that way and then be reimbursed? I don't, can you explain how that all would work?
Well, we're looking we're looking to create partnerships with other entities such as the Urban Ranch Conservancy, as well as California Department of Fish and Wildlife, because they have oversight in these areas as well. They manage the open space and so forth. So TCA can obviously take that on themselves, but we thought it would be a greater benefit if there was a partnership component of the
Well,
project.
just based on some of the comments Director Spitzer said, I do think it is a public safety issue, and I would hate to be waiting years and years and then have another problem and cost us so much money. So maybe we could have an update in January, February to talk about this, what the options could be, especially with this refinancing. Maybe there's an opportunity there with some funds to really get this project moving and do the right thing. Thank you.
Valerie, I know we're going to fix the 25,000 linear feet. Are you saying that the other sections, though, have not been compromised, and that's why they're not being addressed at this point?
They're not being addressed at this point because we budgeted a certain amount for this current fiscal year. And so this phase of the project will end around June. And so at that point, we'll have funding for next fiscal year, and we'll be able to implement those. So it'll be staged, but based on the fiscal year. So that's why we're moving forward with these two sections, because they are consistent with what we have budgeted.
Okay, all right. And they have the highest priority at this point. All right. Okay, Director Beal.
Just briefly, can you clarify, does this agency have an actual legal obligation to complete this project? I know it's referenced as a requirement of a biological opinion, but are we legally required to do this?
I can defer to George Joseph. It is a permit that we obtained from when we constructed the project from the resource agencies.
It's a legal requirement as a condition to obtaining the permit. So, yeah, even though we are not otherwise legally responsible for maintaining the roads themselves, in this particular instance, as part of the environmental approval process, we did agree and commit ourselves to comply with the conditions of the permit.
What would the ramifications be if we didn't go forward?
I suspect there might be an effort to seek some sort of mandatory injunctive relief to compel us to do so. That's what I would.
So we're required to do so?
Yeah.
And as long as I've got legal counsel speaking about this, as to the comments that were made about legal liability, I mean, I could think of probably hundreds of thousands, if not more, miles across this entire country that are fenced, that animals run in the roadway and they cause accidents. I'm unaware that there would be liability. I think, isn't that a risk that people would assume driving on roads that an animal runs in front of you?
I wouldn't call it a foregone conclusion that we would lose that kind of a lawsuit, but anytime you are involved in litigation, it costs you whether you win or lose, and so obviously it's something we want to avoid. But I could certainly think of arguments as to why we would not be responsible legally, but there are arguments both ways, and we want to avoid having to make those arguments. That's the point.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, Director Kring and then Director Schwing.
Yeah, just briefly, I guess we both said that. Anyhow, out of the 14 people that initially were interested, it's amazing that we actually ended up with somebody who was willing to do that. So it could have turned out that nobody was willing, so I support moving forward with this.
Great. Okay, Director Schwing.
Yes, Valerie, or perhaps Ryan Chamberlain, do you have any statistics of how many other miles of California highways have similar 8 to 12-foot fencing?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
So why are we unique?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Why it appears that we're unique in this respect, particularly thinking of I-5 in Northern California. I don't recall seeing fencing over 4 feet.
and right on the money. When UC Davis was reaching out to other stakeholders to work on the design, we see what other states are implementing as far as protection, wildlife protection fencing. There are not a lot of other examples in California, but mainly because there's not a lot of new highways in California. The 241 is one of the newer highways that have been built. So unless a highway is retrofitted or expanded, they're not going to be required to have this type of fencing, such as the 241. We have a condition placed on us by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and until we complete or meet their standards, we are required to implement this fencing. So we did reach out to other states that do have similar fencing. Florida, I think Wyoming, Montana, they've recently constructed fencing similar to this, but within California, again, there's not a lot of new highways that are required, that have these requirements placed on them.
Okay, a second question is I understand from at least the newspaper article that the new fencing would be in a new location, many places, closer to the roadway?
Yes.
So the old fence would just be left to deteriorate, go away, or would it be connected anyway, or how would that work?
The existing fence is along the Caltrans right-of-way, and it's a low fence, typically 3 strands, so wildlife can get through and over it. It will be left in place. It's not a detractant from animals obviously being able to get closer to the road. Some areas where the existing fence comes up close to the toll road will be removed, so we don't create a corral type of effect, so animals can get into the open space.
All right, thank you.
Directors, any more questions or comments?
Just one.
Director Reardon?
Just some anecdotal information. Todd, you brought up cars running into animals and so on and so forth. I have a friend who drove from Crown Valley on Antonio to Oso. I think that was the stretch. And a big buck, a deer, came out of nowhere, didn't even see it, hit their car. The good news is they didn't have their children with them, but totaled the car, ended up fur all over the place, okay? And she ended up with Lyme disease. So her life was preserved, but she's still dealing with it. So I understand the issues with this, and I just would like to make mention that we as a board are willing to pay the freight to protect our environment, and that's what we just have to make sure we're vetting everything carefully. So thank you very much, Valerie. You handled all the questions very well.
Yes.
Yeah, I have one
Yeah.
comment, Madam Chairman. Some of you may have seen the article in National Geographic. Did you see that? They did a piece recently on mountain lions being endangered.
In the December issue.
In the December issue, and it's nationwide, but it highlights our road. And one of the things that's happening here is, to your comments, I think we are going above and beyond to deal with this, because the mountain lion population is actually, well, I guess right now it's growing a little bit, but it's been not endangered technically, but
It's been declining.
declining. And so this is really is, in my opinion, we're taking a problem and doing something over and above, which is, and Valerie does a great job here leading that.
Thank you. Directors, do we have a motion? Motion and a second, all right? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, that item passes. We'll now move on to item number 6, 24191 Connector Consultant Services and Cooperative Agreement. Mr. Lowe, staff report.
Good morning. I don't have any cute, cuddly animals to bring with me, but I will bring up an important project for the agency. It's the 24191 connector. And this item is for 3 different separate items, and the first includes an amendment to the RBF contract. The contract, a little bit of history behind this contract. It was originally awarded in January of 2011 for an amount of about $2.1 million for a combined project study report, a combined project initiation, project approval document that we would put through Caltrans. In July of 2011, due to budget constraints, Caltrans halted the participation on the project due to some budget constraints, and they stopped the participation in all project initiation documents. That caused us to complete a separate project initiation document and a separate project report. The initiation document was completed in 2012, and this allowed Caltrans to continue to work with our project development team on advancing the project. Also, in order to not delay the project to the east of us in Riverside County, the 91 Capital Improvement Project, we put our project on hold so that environmental approval would not get delayed. In January of this year, your board issued a $200,000 amendment to RBF to get that project restarted. And included in that board report in January of this year was a note that mentioned that we would be looking at the project report phase or project approval phase of the document and bringing back those additional costs to you. Those additional costs are what's covered in this report as far as the RBF contract goes. The RBF amendment is basically broken down into 3 categories. The first one includes additional work due to the contract time extension. Originally, the contract that was issued in 2011 was anticipated to be complete in October 2012, and the current schedule is for late next year. The second category includes rework of items that we had already completed, including the mixing bowl geometry, traffic modeling and sensitivities, and technical environmental studies. These changes were a result of meetings with OCTA and Caltrans after the restart of the project last January. The third category is for new scope items that were unforeseen in the original contract, such as a full biological assessment, a noise barrier feasibility study, a risk analysis, a value analysis, and a concept of operations report. These items were not part of the anticipated scope in the original 2011 contract. We had foreseen much reduced effort for environmental clearance through a simple environmental addendum rather than a supplemental EIR/EIS. The next item is a traffic and revenue study by Stantec, and this was included in this fiscal year budget and is needed in order to better understand the potential revenue from tolling the connector. Stantec is being recommended as a sole source award for this project, as they have provided the agency with traffic and revenue projections for the past decade. They also work with both OCTA and RCTC on their 91 express lane systems. Through the work at TCA, they have developed a robust transportation model for the region, and selection of a new consultant would likely result in a higher cost due to reestablishing that model. The last item is for an amendment to the existing cooperative agreement between OCTA and TCA. The work to date on this project has been shared between our 2 agencies on a 50-50 basis. This amendment simply addresses the 2 additional items being recommended for approval in this report, the RBF amendment and the TNR study. OCTA staff is expecting to bring this item to their board in February of next year. I will say that there were a number of comments that came up at a December 2nd executive committee meeting at OCTA, and we are working with OCTA to share some data we've developed as well as data that they have to help them prepare for a January 6th executive committee update that they'll be coming back to OCTA executive committee and updating that committee on the progress of the project. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes. Director Spitzer?
Man, this is kind of a hornet's nest, and the board kind of should know what that discussion was at the executive board of OCTA, because well, let me go back and say this. So in 1996, when I was running for Susan Withrow from Mission Viejo was a candidate, and she was, I think, had served on this board, I think, at the time. So she brought in the campaign this big issue, I guess to help get votes up in Marsh Wiggs' neck of the woods and Lucille's neck of the woods, that we should do this 241-91 Connect because it was part of the original EIR for the 241. It made perfect sense, and she actually helped me highlight an issue I really didn't know a thing about. And so we've been talking about this project forever, and it's a really important project. So a couple weekends ago, I had nothing to do, so I was sitting at home reading the official statement of the Foothill Eastern Refi, and yeah, I know I need to get a life. And so I was reading the Stantec analysis, and they had to disclose this whole interchange, and it was disclosed that it could be revenue positive, but there's not necessarily any financing from the Foothill Eastern identified in the refi, although there's about $120 million in cash in that refi, and so who knows, how it would be used. But So I'm a huge champion of this and have been for more than a decade, and it's like time to get off the dime and get this thing built. But if we add people coming off the 241 down from Windy Ridge and we put them eastbound 91, then OCTA has to deal with that. They have to create capacity. And the only way to create capacity generally is to increase tolls. And it's too bad Sean's not here, because Sean really raised this as an issue, and I think it's really important. So there's a major issue about what, if anything, OCTA is willing to do in this project in terms of raising tolls at the 55 in order to create capacity so you can put more people in from the 241, eastbound 91. That's one issue. And I think there could be some OCTA board members who would be very upset or offended about having to raise tolls to accommodate customers coming off the toll. And then what I keep pushing, I push back on Sean, is that this is a system, and we've got to start thinking about this as a system, not OCTA, TCA. That's why I keep pushing for these discussions, because this is about mobility, and we can't be parochial about it. But there's a partnership in here which is 50-50. And so we are not alone in this analysis. Like that's, and there's another major issue. It's not just increasing capacity. We know from the Stantec earlier model, it's kind of old data, but even in the best case scenario, and obviously we get a lot tighter numbers with Stantec would be authorized here, but under the old numbers, you have about a 30%, there's about a 30 to 50% acknowledgement that that would be how you cover the project. About only 30 to 50% of toll revenue will pay for the debt service to do the flyover. So there's a major public policy issue in front of OCTA that has never been broached or breached. And that is, I kind of like how I said that actually. I mean, this came out, sorry. But you use it, yeah. So the issue is are you going to use non-toll revenue, like general fund revenue or some other revenue source that's not toll related? Because our only toll at OCTA is the 91 Express Lanes. And we have an extra $10 million a year that we could infuse into the project. And I don't know where the directors are going to be on that, but we have a commitment to spend in the corridor. So we know we got some money, but we don't have non-toll. We are going to have to decide as a policy at OCTA. And if the directors are going to be comfortable about spending non-toll revenue to pay for a toll project, to service debt. And so the only thing I'm suggesting is not necessarily holding this up, but putting a caveat in here on the expenditure of, these are big numbers. Like Rhonda, you were talking about big numbers on the fence. These are some, not as big as the fence, but they're still some big numbers. And I just want to throw this out. I need Neil's feedback. I know he is here. Dave, your feedback. It seems to me that these actions to expend money, to authorize, the expenditure of additional studies, that should all be subject to a majority of the OCTA board voting affirmatively to adopt a policy whereby non-toll revenue can be utilized to supplement the 241-91 construction and or debt structure. In other words, until the board makes a policy decision in OCTA that they might entertain the concept of spending non-toll revenue on the 241-91 exchange. Because again, if you believe what we've been told, 30 to 50% shortfall, well, could be a 70% shortfall, 50 to 70% shortfall. Then why would you spend all this money if the OCTA board is not willing to participate? And so I'm going to throw that out there, Dave, to you. And if the numbers don't come in other words, the Stantec revenue, or excuse me, the Stantec modeling doesn't show you can pay for 100% of the financing of 241-91 interchange through the toll revenue itself, and I don't think the numbers will be there. Don't we have to have OCTA as some kind of participant in this financially? And don't you think we should get to that policy question as a threshold question before we spend $1 million? Is that clear?
Yes, I have the question. So I think a couple of things. Number one, OCTA, as you mentioned, is going through their process. They need more information to be able to answer the regional impact of this. And a lot of the data that actually is going to be developed by the TNR study will inform that discussion.
That's where I want to just pause. I don't think so. But I heard from Sean. Sean's very influential, very powerful, and very persuasive. We all know that. And what he said was, and articulated well enough to get me to stop and think, hey, you are basically saying OCTA is going to have to agree to raise tolls to create capacity. It's a big discussion at OCTA on the 91. And we're gonna have to reach into our pockets to figure out how to pay for it. Now, my pushback, where I'm more in your camp, is, Sean, you can't just look, we're gonna, if we do the 24191 Connect, we're gonna make it, the drive easier on the 55. Right? We're gonna alleviate capacity problems we're having on the 55 that OCTA has to deal with, because less people are gonna go all the way west, and they're gonna jump over to get to the Irvine Spectrum and the occupational centers, like that. So I'm trying to educate my colleagues and get them to think there should be a mobility and a regional perspective, and maybe the TNR will do that. But what I raised at OCTA, Pat, you remember, was we need to know where the people who would use the direct connect are coming from. So if they're working in the Irvine Spectrum, and they won't take the 241 because they're gonna sit at Windy Ridge, right, waiting to get on the 91, and they backtrack all the way over to the 55 to get on the express lanes, and then Sean's responsible, you're arguing Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. My response to that is, people will engage with Mr. Toad's Wild Ride to figure out how to not sit in traffic. I do it all the time. I live at that intersection there where we're gonna do the fences, and I go all the way back to the 55 to get on the HOV, to get on the 91 Express, because I can't sit at Windy Ridge and go nowhere. So you might be right, but my question is this: if we make it, you're saying spend the money, get the data, and help drive the discussion.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, shouldn't we have OCTA weigh in on whether they might be willing to engage in that before we expend those kinds of resources here?
I think my own recommendation would be no. In other words, I would think that we'd want to proceed with it in order to help inform OCTA. The regional impacts of this are so intuitive. I mean, you mentioned the one going eastbound. What about the one going westbound? My goodness, everybody that's on that, they're going to have a choice of getting on the 241 versus getting on the 55. It has a huge impact on the 55.
I agree.
Not in addition to the point you made on the 55 going westbound. So intuitively, this makes a ton of sense. We've got to get some better data for the OCTA board members to see that in numbers. On the second point that I would mention is on the financing. I think the thing that we need to think about here is, let's assume the tolling of the interchange itself picks up 30 or 50% of it. I'm not convinced that you have to go to non-toll revenue sources to pick up the remainder. In other words, just think of our road, for example. The 241 will benefit in general from this connector. Not only will there be a toll at the connector, but there'll be increased traffic on the 241 as a result. Those revenues,
says,
right?
You've studied that, and it shows.
Absolutely. So those revenues, a portion of that could be applied to this. And when you think about the numbers here, they're relatively small in comparison to the kind of projects OCTA does and we do in a normal case. So let's say it's 140 million, let's say half of it's ours, and let's say that's 70 million, let's say 35 of it's picked up from the tolls of the connection. That means we have to finance 35 million over a period of time, and we have 130 million in reserves right now. We'll be, this year alone, we'll be collecting another 10 million from what we thought we were going to collect, not to mention the impact of the refinancing. This, from my point of view, can easily be handled financially. And I think from an OCTA point of view, and I'm not speaking for OCTA, I'm giving you my opinion here, but in addition to looking at other colors of money, they have revenues from the 91 that have the same. The 91 will have an increased revenue as a result of this. I agree with you that it involves increasing fares perhaps to modulate traffic, but there will be an increased revenue coming from the RCTC project as well as ours. And so they can decide, that board can decide whether or not they want to apply some of those revenues just like we might want to decide on the 241. So I think it's eminently financeable. And I think the issue here is educating everybody about the regional, as you've been pointing out from day one, the regional connectivity issues.
I'd like to bring up one engineering point, that the capacity that we need to make room for on the 91 express lanes is not, the 91 express lanes will not be a closed system in between Orange County and Riverside County. There's a gap there, and our connector ramp actually enters in that gap. So there is, you don't just have to make room from the 55 all the way to the east. There is the ability for people to move out of the Orange County express lanes and get into the Riverside County Express lanes, and we believe that will provide some traffic capacity for the connector traffic. So that's another possibility, and we're playing with those volumes to see which one would be most beneficial.
Madam Chair, just in closing on my, I am all for this. Look, I want to move this more than anybody. It's, okay? But I don't want the board. I think it's important for you all to know what the discussions are and the policy issues, because I think we're more motivated on this end because we would have a revenue positive by having the direct connect for Foothill Eastern. But when you take the issue of whether or not OCTI raise tolls, where they're going to put the excess revenue in there, we've made 22 lane mile improvements in the 91 corridor by eliminating the non-compete clause. In other words, we've been able to make improvements there, which is positive. We should shed that excess revenue from the 91 express lanes and do projects like this. We're making $10 million a year. We raise tolls, we're probably going to drop that a little bit. You'll see that in the Stantec modeling. But if we can't pair it, in other words, there may be a push on TCA to financially participate to a greater extent than maybe some of the directors who, as you watch the 405 debate, they're not real comfortable in the toll road arena. So you have to pause on that discussion. You laughing, but you know I'm right.
I'm smiling about that.
My colleagues are, like Patricia and I are inherently familiar with this and accept it. We deal with it. She and I have been dealing with this for decades. But our colleagues are not. And so if you ask them to break that sanctity, if you will, we've never ever used other revenue for toll, 91 self-contained. Just be prepared for, we may at some point have to respond to that if we want to see this project occur. That's all.
Okay, thank you for your comments, but I think it is really important to move forward. And the Stantec work that's being contemplated here will give us a lot of the answers that we need to move forward and make those decisions. Director Bates?
Having sat through that discussion too, there was, I think, a lot of undercurrent in terms of subsidizing, OCTA subsidizing TCA. And I think the discussion raised to the level of mobility and regional mobility has to really step to the forefront. And we are going to have a meeting on tolling policy January 16th, which I think is going to help clarify in the areas of a toll road versus a toll lane and how it all works. But I think what you said, Dave, was certainly not something I understood, and perhaps many, I'm not the engineer type, but the fact that there's an opportunity to get in and get out at that connector. And I don't believe that even got there in the discussion, because us, Board Member Nelson's concern was them looking like they're subsidizing TCA, the toll road, which is supposed to be totally independent, developer fees and tolls alone. So I think that helps, and that should get back into the dialogue.
Okay, directors, any more questions or comments? We have a motion here.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, that item passes. We now move on to Chief Executive Officer's report.
Madam Chair, I've got two items for you today. One is, you want to do the video first or second? Okay, we've got two items. One is, I wanted to show you, those of you that have not been on the road show, Lisa has been on the road show on an unbelievable schedule over the last week and a half. And at that road show, we do a presentation, and one of the pieces of the presentation is a video. And it's just a couple of minutes, but we wanted to show it to you because I think it'll be informative.
Orange County, California, 40 miles south of Los Angeles, 60 miles north of San Diego. With more than 3 million residents and a workforce of 1.5 million, it's the 6th largest county in the nation. Add to that, 48 million visitors a year making their way from across the country and around the world to visit miles of beaches, the Disney Resort, pro sports teams, the largest convention center in the western U.S., and South Coast Plaza, the most successful retail center in the world. Getting those millions of residents, workers, and visitors to wherever they're going 24/7 requires the largest, most advanced freeway, transit, and toll facility network in the country. And the Orange County toll roads, the first modern-day toll roads in California, are a 51-mile critical link in that network. In the 1970s, as Orange County grew from a quiet bedroom community to one of the state's economic engines, county planners realized that 2 new highways were badly needed. A coastal road through the San Joaquin Hills from the airport area to South County, and an inland road through the foothills in eastern Orange County that would connect it to the inland empire of Riverside and San Bernardino counties. The Foothill Eastern Road would address the job housing imbalance that planners predicted between the inland counties with their more affordable housing and coastal Orange County with its ready supply of jobs. Today, you can see that job housing imbalance played out twice a day on the Foothill Eastern Toll Road as thousands of commuters make their way from Riverside and San Bernardino to the major employment centers in Orange County, in Tustin, Irvine, Anaheim's Disney Resort, and the South Coast Metro and airport areas. But the steady growth in transactions and revenues on the Foothill Eastern in recent months also indicates that the Great Recession is in the county's rearview mirror. With an unemployment rate of 5.8% in October 2013, according to the California Department of Economic Development, the lowest in Orange County since 2007. Another positive influence on ridership is the strong recovery of home building in the region and the state, arguably California's most powerful economic engine. At the southern terminus of the 241 toll road, the Rancho Mission Viejo Company's master plan community is well underway after more than 20 years of planning, with 1,040 units under construction in Phase 1 and 14,000 homes and townhomes to be completed at build-out. Both the 241 and the 261 provide direct access to the former Marine Air Base in Tustin, where 1,800 homes have been completed, with 300 more to come, in addition to more than 6 million square feet of commercial, retail, and entertainment space at build-out. Ridership has also been strengthened by an aggressive marketing campaign in both print and broadcast media.
Just how much time could you save every day driving the toll roads? It's wide open.
Another positive development for the toll roads is the expansion of Southern California's managed lane network, with new or planned toll lanes throughout the region. As that network grows, the direct toll lane to toll road connectors between the 91 express lanes and the 241, for which environmental and TNR studies are being started and a design build team is being selected, will increase the 241's value to commuters and enhance its marketability. In 2014, the toll roads will become all electronic toll facilities, making them more user-friendly and reducing operating costs. It's one more innovation from an agency that was born from innovation, like implementing the vehicle identification and toll collection technologies that are the national standard today. 2013 marks the Foothill Eastern's 20th anniversary. 20 years ago, with revenue bonds, a federal line of credit, and virtually no taxpayer money, it was a groundbreaking venture that quickly became a model for toll facilities across the country and around the world. Since then, even with the Great Recession, toll revenues have grown an average of more than 4% a year for the past 10 years, and the TCA has lived within all its bond covenants, managing its resources, and never hesitating to raise tolls when needed. As the Foothill Eastern enters its third decade, the indicators are positive and the view is decidedly clear.
Do you recognize the announcer?
Peter Booth. Peter Booth.
We're on a budget.
Peter Booth.
Peter Foothill. Yeah.
He's our financial manager.
Isn't that well done?
Yeah, very good.
So you imagine you're making these presentations to basically East Coast, primarily East Coast people that have no concept of what a California road looks like or is about. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, it was a piece of it.
And on the roadshow, the video was very well received as well.
So the second thing I'd like to do is we're lucky to have Susan Lynn in town, who's one of our DC representatives, and she can give us a brief overview of the kinds of issues that are coming before Congress in the next session that we want to pay attention to. Susan.
Good morning, board members. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the federal issues that we can expect in Washington in 2014 and how the TCA can be involved. As many of you know, the surface transportation law typically has been a 5 to 6 year bill. The last bill, which is MAP 21, passed in 2012. However, it was only a 2-year bill, and many of you also know that there's some significant issues right now in terms of how to fund transportation and address it. But the fact of the matter is that on September 30th, 2014, the existing transportation law is going to expire. While anything can happen, Congress is going to try to reach some type of an agreement, even if it's another short-term extension, so that they don't stop the transportation program, particularly with an election coming up in November. The fact that we have another transportation law coming up for consideration next year is an opportunity for the TCA to get involved and make recommendations regarding the new law. And the benefit of that for the agency is twofold. One is you're engaging in the process in terms of the agency's interest as a transportation agency and the community's interest. And then the second is that you're highlighting, you're in the agency's, expertise and role as thought leaders in terms of how to solve the congestion and mobility issues that, as the video that we just watched shows, are pretty significant in Orange County and South Orange County in particular. So what we've started doing, working with Mr. Peterson and staff, is develop some recommendations for the transportation reauthorization that we'd like to work with the board on, and at some point in the near future get the board's approval, and then develop that into potential legislation, work with all of you to go and meet with members of the Orange County delegation and the House and Senate transportation committees, maybe look for opportunities to testify, and then advocate to get those provisions included into the next law. So just very generally, the 4 areas that we've been looking at are environmental streamlining, innovative financing and TIFIA, mobility enhancement and goods movement, and then tolling flexibility. And so again, briefly, environmental streamlining in the MAP 21 bill, the TCA had a list of specific recommendations for streamlining the environmental review process. All of our recommendations were included in the House bill. Then in the conference, we had some of the recommendations were included and some of them were changed slightly. So we have an opportunity to come in again and make new recommendations for, again, expediting approvals, having better coordination between lead agencies and participating agencies, limiting the time for review, having, when you have a law like CEQA that's very stringent, allow the CEQA process to substitute for the NEPA process. Those are some of the things that we're talking about on environmental streamlining. For TIFIA, again, there's some real opportunities potentially for the TCA with TIFIA. The TIFIA program was significantly expanded in MAP 21, but there's a lot of criticisms because you have the Department of Transportation, which is trying to be so careful because the administration wants to avoid another Solyndra, that they're basically hamstrung and they're having a very difficult time entering into agreements, and they're imposing requirements that are not necessarily prudent in light of the fact that, many agencies like the TCA, they've got bond covenants that they've got to adhere to, and so, some of the requirements are just particularly onerous and difficult. So we've also been developing some reforms to the TIFIA program, working with Amy Potter and others to look at those, and we'll bring those back to you as well. On the mobility enhancement, there's an effort. There was a requirement in MAP 21 that the Department of Transportation develop a national freight network. And so what we want to look at is, as part of this national freight network and goods movement, that you look at roads that will ensure that the goods movement corridors don't negatively impact on neighborhoods. And that's where the interplay between the goods movement corridors like I-5 have with roads like the Foothill South, so that there are alternatives for people commuting between jobs and their homes. And then finally, tolling flexibility is the concept of, right now there's a lot of
there's a lot of limitations on tolling and tolling the interstate and how, and looking at providing states and local governments more flexibility in terms of their ability to toll, so that there's more of a seamlessness between toll roads and toll lanes, as was mentioned earlier. So that's a summary of the general concepts, and what we're going to do is bring back more detailed recommendations, and then hopefully we'd be able to, with your approval, develop legislation and background materials, and then start to talk about some of these issues in Washington. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions, directors? Any comments? Thank you very much, Susan. Anything else for Chairman's report? Okay. All right. Directors, do you have any comments under directors' reports? Okay, Director Spitzer.
Thank you, colleagues. On January 16th, OCT is hosting a regional, all the transportation commissions from Southern California, that means including Imperial County, I mean every county, and the TCA, as a preliminary discussion about the future of toll roads, mobility, HOV conversion, hot lanes. I mean, where are we going with toll roads in the state of California? One of the reasons I think the 405 blew up was because there's just no relationships with a lot of these. We've had relationships, right, because we deal with it. But other elected officials are not comfortable with tolling. They don't really understand the concepts. And even if they do, they don't have a trust relationship. So Malcolm Doherty, the director of Caltrans, some of the directors at OCT, we met with him recently. He is going to be putting together what Caltrans's principles are and Ryan Chamberlain's leadership. And I want to thank Ryan for everything he's done, because it's been a very difficult and intense conversation. But I talked to Malcolm yesterday. We were at the groundbreaking for the Riverside Express lanes. He's very excited about it. And since he's going to be coming out with principles, and Neil, he and I have talked about this, this agency has a real responsibility, a great leadership role, and a lot of history to be able to share with the entire state of California about how to do toll roads right. So that is a conference that hopefully will lead to a summit or a symposium for all elected officials, because we have to limit it because of Brown Act issues. But we're going to at least kick off the preliminary conversation in this whole area on the 16th. So I don't know how this is being, I don't know how you all are working out your designees who are going to participate. I'll leave that up to the chairs. But if you have any interest in this conference, you might want to talk to the chair. Because I think the more that can participate and not make it a Brown Act issue, although it can be noticed, it's a public meeting, so we could probably, I don't think, actually thinking about it, we probably wouldn't have to limit it if you all wanted to come. But anyway, I just wanted to put it on the radar for you.
Great, thank you. Directors, anything else? Okay, do we have a need for closed session today?
No, we do not.
Okay, we will now adjourn to our next meeting, which will be January the 9th. And Foothill Board members, there is lunch available for us in the conference room next